Hey folks, welcome to this edition of Black Beat. I'm John Washington, the editor-in-chief of Flossin Media and the host of this podcast series where we take unapologetically black approaches to the topics and issues impacting our community. On this show, we continue a series on environmental justice as part of a campaign we call Earth Needs Allies. The campaign is in collaboration with Flossin Media and the Seoul District Business Association. The Seoul District Business Association's annual fundraiser event called the MLK Dream Run. This event is happening on Saturday and Sunday, September 17th and 18th at PCC Cascade Campus in Portland, Oregon. Today, we welcome our distinguished guest, Bob Gravelees from Pacific Power. Pacific Power is one of the Let Freedom Ring sponsors in this year's run. Bob Gravelees, the Regional Business Manager of Pacific Power for Portland. In his role, Bob is responsible for or involved in Pacific Power's local government and community affairs, major customer account management, economic development, and philanthropic giving for the Portland area. Bob has also held public affairs and government affairs roles during his 11 years at Pacific Power. A Portland resident for 20 years, Bob is active in the community and currently serves on boards or advisory committees for the Portland Workforce Development Board, the Lloyd Enhancement Service District, Oregon Energy Fund, UNCF, USEF, and Oregon's Association for Minority Entrepreneurs. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much, John.
Oh, my pleasure, man, to have you this morning. So, Bob, tell us a little bit about Bob. You know, where you come from, Bob, where you grew up, what gets you enthused about being, you know, and every day when you wake up, what gets you excited, Bob?
I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, so all the way across the country, kind of in between Philadelphia and Baltimore, so
Right
East
on.
Coast, and then I lived in Washington, D.C. for kind of the first 10 years of my adult life, you could say, and I started...
Good old D.C.
Yeah, D.C.'s a good town. And I started out in journalism, and then...
Look, man, what you been holding back on as you started out in journalism? You sit there, you're a journalist, man. Okay, right on, man. Maybe we should have just interviewed you for the magazine and let you write your own articles. Go for it, man.
But then I made my way out to Portland, and I've been here, and this is kind of where I've made my life, and you know I have two kids in high school now.
Right on, man.
And have been you know with the power company and enjoying my role, which is really getting me out and involved in the community. So, you know, I'm really thrilled to see more events happening again and people getting out, and you know everything seems different these days.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's also I don't know if I'd say exciting, but it just feels like everything is different. And
I agree, but exciting, that's nice. Those are kind words. I think some people just going plumb outright crazy out there those days. I will tell you.
I know. Exciting's probably not the right word, but you know, it does feel like it's a time to engage. It does feel like there's a lot to be determined. I feel like the future of you know this city and our society. There's so much happening now. It's just feels like an important time.
But come on, Bob. Well, talk us a little bit about the work Pacific Power is doing around this environmental justice topic.
Yeah. Well, you know, Pacific Power is the utility. We serve about 20% of Portland, but most of North and Northeast Portland. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we've been around for 100 years. We've been involved in the community for a long time. In addition to keeping the lights on, you know, we've been involved with community organizations for a long time. But I would say the last couple of years, like a lot of other kind of companies, we've, you know, had to kind of look at ourselves and say, what are we doing? What could we do more of? What could we do better? So, you know, we've recently hired kind of a full-time diversity, equity, and inclusion director that reports directly to our CEO here in Portland, so that we can kind of examine everything we're doing and look for ways to do more. We're going out, we're trying to figure out how to better engage community organizations in planning that utilities do. So
Wow.
everything down to how do we communicate with people? Are we
Gotcha.
communicating the right, and we're involving more voices in those discussions, so, that we can find out what we're doing right, we can find out what we could do better, and really look at things more closely going forward.
That's cool, Bob. So, Bob, tell me a little bit, in your view, what makes Pacific Power a good Earth ally?
That's an interesting question, because we as an electric utility and as a power company that has traditionally relied on things like coal and natural gas to keep the lights on, you could argue that, we've been part of the problem. So, but we're also super important going forward to try to do this the right way and move from fossil fuels to cleaner renewable energy resources. So
Gotcha.
we've been kind of a leader in that sense in terms of developing wind. We're one of the largest owners of wind power in the country.
Wow.
And so we're part of that transition, but we also are in a place where we have to manage it responsibly so we're not hurting people along the way. Everybody wants more renewable energy, everybody wants cleaner air, but we also have to be super careful that we don't jack people's bills, right?
Yeah,
Because if someone's paying $100 a month for their electricity, if suddenly it goes to 140 or 150, that can hurt people. So in that sense, I feel companies like Pacific Power in that spot where we're part of the transition to cleaner energy, but we also directly impact people in the community. So we have to be very mindful of how we do it, and we're right in the middle of that, and that's a lot of what we focus on right now.
Bob, on the last several years, I've been, traveling, even doing a little bit during the pandemic, man, and, the transition is fascinating, right? Coming from that antiquated, what we know about in the past, all that trying to move to the future. And in that, and so when we start talking about this wind power and all that, and, and then you look at how when you install these things, what it looks like on the landscape of some of these states, man, where you guys really invested a lot in this wind stuff, man. I mean, and it sort of was a mixed bag, man. Some of it, on that flat land running, we know some people from Iowa and all those kinds of places, man. You get out there in them cornfields and you look, and there are people who take their whole farms and put these windmills and stuff on them, man. I mean, and so, I mean, do you have a department that looks at how aesthetically these things are woven into the landscape? Or is it just something that we just go out there because we want wind power, we just put up a big old thing that just blows some wind, But are people pushing back on these types of things, man, and looking at these things, or is there another way, or are you going to approach it? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a big question, because unfortunately right now there is no way to generate electricity that doesn't have an impact on something. You can put dams in the river, that impacts fish.
Right.
You can burn coal, that impacts the air.
Yeah.
You can use wind power, and that, as you say, puts wind farms across the landscape, and there's impacts to birds. Same with solar panels. Solar panels cover lots of ground. So.
Wow.
Unfortunately, right now, everybody needs electricity. Everybody wants electricity, but there's no way that is impact-free. So what has kind of generally guided us is affordability and moving toward cleaner resources, and keeping the power on. The other, another challenge with renewable resources is you can't just turn them on and off, right?
Wow.
Sometimes the wind's not blowing,
Yeah.
sometimes the sun's not out.
Yeah.
So how do you move toward more renewable energy? But then if there's a heat wave or it's cloudy in California, how do you keep the lights on? So all these things you talk about,
mitigating, huh?
Yeah, it makes it
Yeah.
very challenging in that. But that's what we do. That's the essence of what's going on behind the scenes.
I'm sorry to just divert, but but it's still obvious when we get into those states and places where alternative power and those things are being employed. I'm just recognizing it, just as we talk about how things have changed, these things add serious change to the landscape, man. I mean, but I guess there's a price in any transition we're gonna have to pay somewhere along the line. But let's take it back to our state, Bob. The state of Oregon is investing $100 million, right, and into electric vehicle charging stations. Okay, what role is Pacific Power playing in this?
Right now, we mostly make sure that places that want to provide electric vehicle charging have the power connection to do it. And we're working a lot with the City of Portland, Multnomah County, TriMet, Metro, pretty much all the government agencies, a lot of our large customers to, provide the power for their charging. We also are involved in distributing a lot of grants. So we will, we'll work with all our partners in government, our customers, to give grants and make sure that they can connect where they want to connect.
So how's the black community being engaged in this effort in regards to workforce development?
I think a lot, well, in terms of EV charging, I mean, one thing we look at when we give grants is where there's a need. So if a grant comes in from an area that's already well set up, that won't get as much priority as places in East Portland or somewhere else where there may be more of a need. And I know when the city and the county and others get involved in this too, they also very much look at communities that have more of a need than others when we make those decisions.
So in consideration for the workforce, and then developing that workforce, and then in this electric car section, have you guys looked at the impact on the ancillary industries that support gas and combustible engines situations? How is this transition going to impact that? And then what are you guys looking at in terms of the workforce and trying to support any of these other, like mechanics and things of that nature?
John, I don't really know so much on that. I know that for our own workforce, we have a big need for workers coming up. A large section of our line workers and other trade crafts are retirement eligible, so we're going to have a lot of turnover in our workforce. So we know for us there's lots of opportunities, but I'm afraid I'm probably not the best to kind of speak to other industries, and we tend to just focus on keeping the lights on.
But y'all are conscious and aware that it's going to have an impact, right?
Right.
I mean, as we continue to push those alternative things, something's going to have to die, right? You're going to put something to rest. But the question, man, and for as far as I'm looking at it is, it just seems like BIPOC or alternative communities, black communities, we tend to be last to the party, right? On some of these situations, and then as we grasp the golden straw in that sector, right, it gets yanked out of your head and the sector changes and goes somewhere else. So we left with something that we can't use, So it's kind of we want to stay real focused on the transition and how that transition is going to impact our community in the long haul. I mean, it's always good to go, hey, hooray, hooray, it's something new, something exciting, let's go in that direction. But as you well know, I don't know if you know, Bob, I mean, but when we think about any of the alternative energy sources, green, all those things, I don't know about you, but whenever I hear those topics in the last 5 years and being somebody that's been on the grind now for the last 35 in this sector, communications and media and all that kind of stuff, is that whenever you start thinking about green, instantaneously you think white people. Yeah. But that's an assumption that is really an assumption, because we as people of ethnic backgrounds have been connected to the land and the earth and the sky since we've been here and in our inception, So but somehow or another, the economic impact reality of those industries and those transitions and stuff seems to always jump over our communities and go somewhere else, and everybody else seems to get the reward of that, but we tend to still be sitting there going, wow, what's happening? And so these are some things that we want to stay really current about.
And I think you're absolutely right there, and I think that is something that utilities, companies like Pacific Power, recognize that we have to do better. We have always looked at how to keep things the most affordable and keep the lights on. But I think that there's been a pretty broad recognition, including among ourselves, that we're not getting the input from the community that we've needed to best manage these kinds of transitions. So we're in the process right now. We've done it in the state of Washington, and we're in the process of doing it for our communities in Oregon, including Portland, to set up advisory groups where we're going to go. We're in the process right now of recruiting community organizations that represent communities of color, BIPOC, others, and so that we can get input on exactly these kinds of questions. How do we manage these transitions? How do we plan in ways that take into account exactly what you're talking about?
We have a guest sitting at the table. You don't really want to talk. He come here new on the crew. Introduce yourself, my brother, and let the world know that you exist.
Hi everyone, I'm Jarrell Scott.
What's your thoughts, Jarrell, about what you're hearing right about now?
I personally never really thought too much about like the connection of sustainable and renewable energy and like the Black community.
Right.
Just I know like from my experience, I'm from Portland and I grew up here, and that's just things that are conversations that like we never really had like in my community and stuff like that. So now hearing that there's like these new sustainable options and like how people are trying to connect people of color and minorities to renewable energy, and also take into consideration like finances and affordability. It feels like it's a huge step forward. There's a lot of progression in it.
See, like I said, you never know who's sitting at the table with you, right? Oh boy, got a thought or two in his head about all this. So Bob, tell us, how is Pacific Power, the education, getting the everyday Tyrone and Shalonda, involved in, this overall movement of environmental justice, man? I mean, what are you guys doing to ensure some kind of equity in that space, man?
I think a lot, part of it is what we're doing internally. Like I said, this is the first time we've had a full-time equity and inclusion director who's going to advise our company internally on all kinds of things, from our workforce and hiring, our community engagement, how we communicate. And then we're also, making an effort to broaden the input we receive through these community advisory groups, as I mentioned. So it's our hope that, kind of through these processes, we will get more involvement, we'll get more voices, we'll learn things that we maybe haven't been doing as well as we can, to kind of get that engagement and win that trust and broaden the participation. And
win that trust, boy. It's always, because when you're a 100-year organization, you got 100-year issues.
Yeah.
You got year 5 and 6. Bringing forward 90 years for hits. You know what I'm saying? So old school. Trying to adjust some of that internal thing. Man. So I can respect that. I get it. I can't get that. Considering the sense of urgency that is circulating around climate change, healthy water and food, what are your thoughts? Give me 2 or 3 things that everyone needs to focus on to improve environmental conditions over the next 3 years, Bob.
I would really just say, I mean, that's tough, but I would just say, try and pay attention and get engaged. There are opportunities to get engaged. There are opportunities to give input. And these are complicated questions. How do you transition in ways that don't impact some communities more than others? How do you become aware of the trade-offs and just educate yourself and look for opportunities to get involved?
Yeah.
Because it's happening, it's moving quickly.
Yeah, man.
And if people don't kind of get involved, it's going to just happen as it's been happening. And I think everybody needs those voices and needs that engagement to just make sure this whole range of issues kind of progresses in the best way.
Bob, and sometimes as I do with these interviews, and we listen and talk about, the interviewee, you get a little reflective after you've had the interview, right? And some of the thoughts you might have had, hindsight, right, when you think about it. So as you sit here with us today, Bob, in this conversation, what are some things that you might think that questions I should have asked you, some thoughts you might have that you would like to inject in this conversation at this point in time that our listeners should be thinking about?
You know, I think you did a good job, John.
Thank you.
I think nothing immediately jumps to mind. I mean, I think I find myself as I'm just sitting here, kind of participating in this and talking with you. It's just an awareness on my behalf how much things like, you know, power companies and other companies just kind of go day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, and how important it is to kind of continue to get that feedback and that connection to the community, especially, you know, communities where services provided, the companies located. So that's my reflection.
Gotcha. I appreciate that, Bob. Darrell, while you're sitting here, man, what's your thoughts, man, about, do you have any questions that you might have wanted to ask that now that you're sitting here listening to this conversation?
Yeah, I did have one question I wanted to ask. Given that, you know, renewable energy is, I wouldn't say it's new, but it's fairly new. What are like some of the steps that you all might be taking in terms of educating like the youth on like the transition to using the renewable energy?
I think, you know, there's a couple different parts of that. There's the transition to renewable energy that comes over the lines that serves everybody, and then there are things that people can get involved with, you know, in terms of their own house. So, you know, we try to give people awareness of programs that we have. Ours is called a Blue Sky program, where you can get grants and solar panels for your own house. You know, we partner with some churches in the area, and some schools and some libraries to put you know, solar panels on the roofs and have education programs through those kinds of grants. So, you know, Augustana Lutheran Church is one that comes to mind, where they recently did that, and they've turned it into a community education project. So we're kind of look for partners in the community where we can help install renewable energy, and then also work with organizations to turn it into educational opportunities for the community.
That sounds like a neat move, man. Come on in here and just drop some of this stuff on people and just say, hey, y'all got to figure out how to make this shit work. And then you got to educate the rest of it. You know, because it would be actually a good move if you get, because I remember like in the neighborhood, right, I get these people, these door knocks, you know, these cold calls, right? And they come in and they go, hey, your windows, I see that your windows on your house need to be upgraded, right? And we're looking for a couple of show houses in the neighborhood to give you a discount on the windows so that we can put our sign outside your window and say, we did your windows, right? And then other people with it. But so then, as we give you this break, you'll go and tell your neighbors, well, they gave me a break and you should get their windows, right? You know? So, I mean, it's a trickle down, but I think, again, for me, I want the public to know, and I want you guys to know, we need to be more intentional and deliberate about what we're trying to accomplish. It's the bottom line, man. And, you know, there are so many different tactical realities that large companies that are 100-year companies who have had to transition from their supremacy stages to now where we have all this equity-based realities, and there have, just as we're trying to change up alternative power sources, a lot of these companies are trying to change up alternative ways of how they deliver their services and how they do these things. So we need to be real more, like I said earlier, more deliberate about how we approach equity and integration into these processes where certain demographics has historically been locked out of a lot of these works. And so it's not so much about we'll get to it, or we don't quite know what to do, or all these suspension tactics, you know, these tactics that are delay. Suspension and delay it can be forever. it can go on and on and on and on with excuses and those things. So when we get more deliberate about and more intentional about the fact of the matter is every structure that supports spiritual development in a society, homogeneousness in a society, all of it talks about how we treat the least amongst us, okay? And how we have to begin to address that reality to have that upward mobility. And most importantly, as we conclude, Bob, I think it's real important is that we look at this whole issue of the wealth gap and how things have affected, because, when you set a trajectory in motion, it's really difficult to recognize that when you shoot something off or you launch something, how it's going to impact the larger community. But I think that we have a little bit of a template to understand how, as we roll out these new ideas and new things, is that the pre-existing structure has its strengths and weaknesses. And I think that we need to start acknowledging the weaknesses that sort of put barriers in front of any of the mobility and growth that